Hello, everybody. It is the Rich Lieberman Bay Area Media Pulse for Sunday, a new month, June 1st, 2025. Good morning, good afternoon. Hope you are having a fantastic weekend. And even if you're not, you're here, you're watching. And it's great to be with you. And I'm hoping you enjoy this little, shall we say, report, story, several stories. You know, um, I like to go back and talk about things in the past because they were better. They were. There are a few things that are better today, but truly, and I lived through it like many of you did, we had a much, in my opinion, superior culture back in the 70's, the 80's, maybe even early 90's. Um, I talk a lot about San Francisco in the 70's because I grew up across the bay, but I had a fond appreciation of San Francisco. The culture, the radio, the television, everything was fantastic to most degrees. What was big in the Bay Area in the 70's on radio? Believe it or not, KFRC was more than just a top 40 bubblegumish radio station. KFRC, the Big 610, as it was known, had personalities, had the greatest contests in the world. I know firsthand because I was one of those schlubs on the phone trying to be caller number 5 or 6 or 10, whatever. That has a soliloquy to it. They had great contests. They gave away concert tickets and care packages that were fantastic, that had bubble gum, speaking of bubble gum, and food and good stuff. But I mentioned the personalities. We had none other than Dr. Don Rose or Dr. Donald B. Rose and people like Marvelous Mark and Don St. John. And who am I leaving out? I know I'm leaving out a whole bunch of people, but KFRC was huge. In the morning, talk about domination from 6 until 10. Dr. Don. And we all know who Dr. Don is, right? San Raquel! And do you remember the sound effects with Roscoe? The, the dog, and San Raquel, and Sacra Tomato. And I mean, Dr. Don was, for those of you who don't remember, his name was real name, Donald Rosenfeld. Or Rosenberg. How could I forget that? Dr. Donald B. Rosenberg. And for one, this guy, he was funny. When you first heard him, you thought, this is corny. He had sound effects, and I mentioned Roscoe and San Raquel and Sacra Tomato, and it was corny. And the most inane sound effects with honking horns and barking dogs and everything. But then you stayed on listening because it was funny. And Dr. Don had like 2 or 3 producers, I do believe, and a staff to play his sound effects and the horns. And it was one of the biggest, and it wasn't just music. That was the least of it. Oh, Don played music, but he had that AM flair. And KFRC even had news people. Matter of fact, guess who started at KFRC? And it was a fantastic news department. they were able to combine the news and top 40 and music and contests and personalities up the yin yang. Dave Your Duke Sholin, I forgot about him, who later on became the owner, managing editor of the Gavin Report, which is a huge, huge industry tip sheet. They had a big convention every year in San Francisco. Those of you in the business watching, you remember the Gavin Report. And Dave Sholin, your Duke Sholin, was a part of it. Who could forget Bobby Ocean? I got to meet Bobby Ocean. I met Marvelous Mark. And yes, I met the king, Dr. Don Rose, who was one of the highest paid DJs. And in those days, DJ was really a compliment in the industry. Dr. Don made over $300,000. A lot of money in those days, a lot of money today, but significantly in the 70s. I think the only person who was near Dr. Don was the famous guy out of Honolulu, guy by the name of Hal Lewis, aka, what was his name? I always screw this up. Somebody will know. It'll come to me in a second. But he had a weird name that he went as, and he was very high paid, right near Dr. Don. Dr. Don was unique and creative, and it was must listen to in the morning during the week on KFRC. Hell, we all listened to KFRC, teenagers like myself, growing up in the 70s, in my case, 76. I was 14 years old, and KFRC was huge. It was kind of like a top 40 equivalent of KGO, and even more popular because everybody would listen to KFRC. I remember going to high school at Skyline and listening to the pop music and the Eagles and Paul McCartney, who was then with Wings, and it was just the hype, the happening place to be. And as I mentioned, the contests, oh my God, they gave away cool prizes. I have a friend at the time named Kevin Tam and his brother Robin. They always won. They always somehow were able to manipulate to get through on the phone lines and be caller number 7 and grab tickets. And I mentioned they had great care packages with lots of swag and this, that, and the other. And Dr. Don, not only was he big, he had some mishaps with his legs. He was a skier. He was so popular, he couldn't make it into the studio in San Francisco. Dr. Don lived in Danville. How popular was Dr. Don? How about he did the show, his show, from his bed, ladies and gentlemen, for like 6 months straight. That's how bad his legs were. He was huge. They wouldn't have built a studio, and that was a lot of money in the 70s, 1976, to build a studio. Why? Because Dr. Don was so popular. He brought in a ton of revenue to the station. KFRC was huge. I mentioned the news people, and I forgot to tell you who came out of KFRC. None other than Vicky Liviakis, Mike Colgan. And yes, Mike Colgan, by the way, was a South Bay Bureau reporter for KCBS. And then there was Ken Bastida. Ken Bastida was, like Vicky Liviakis, a news reporter and an anchor, and KFRC had a really great news department. And in those days, they had news at the top of the hour, at the bottom of the hour, and it was crisp It was fluid. It had just the headlines, but they also had news reporters. It was very cool. KFRC had a contemporary um, competitor across the dial, way at 1260 KYA. Remember John McFlanagan, and a news guy himself. Very cool guy, very nice guy, Larry Brownell. And I'll talk about KYA in another broadcast, but KFRC was huge. They played top 40. They had all the personalities. And each disc jockey, I mentioned Dave, your Duke Sholin, Don St. John, Marvelous Mark, Bobby Ocean. Oh, who could forget? From 7 to 10, Bill Lee. And they were all funny. They all had these kind of, I mean, you think back today, you'd say, oh, how campy. It was. But it was so 70s, and everything was unique. Bell bottoms and the wide lapel and the fat ties and all that. And it was unique and cool. They had great contests. They had great events. I remember distinctively in the spring, they had this march. It was called the Walkathon, the March of Dimes Walkathon. And you had to again listen, because KFRC was like a top 40 in and of itself. And they were located where the studios down on Washington Street would be like where the pyramid is today, but farther down on Washington as you came up towards Broadway and Columbus. And at the time, I do believe KFRC, they were either owned by RKO, which is the old illustrious broadcasting company, no longer, years and years ago. But all the DJs were professional, massive revenue they brought, even in the 70s, brought in a lot of revenue. And every teenager beyond, even young college students, listened to KFRC. Talk about appointment radio. And Dr. Don was, again, cool, funny, sound effects, contests, San Raquel and Roscoe. And, a lot of you right now are shaking your heads or maybe nodding your heads too, agreeing with me, because there was nothing like Dr. Don. I'm still trying to think of the guy in Hawaii. I believe it was something like Kumo or Aku. Kumo. What was it? This drives me crazy. God, it was just off the top of my head. But his real name was Hal Lewis, and he was huge. It was like the equivalent of what I just described, but in Honolulu. Puko. Somebody will get it, and they'll type it out here. I hope. What was it? These guys were big, and they were even bigger than in New York. Who could forget Cousin Brucey, who's still around today, by the way. But these guys were so big. They made big money in those days, and it was just a big party. And, of course, FM was in vogue in the 70s. Of course it was. But AM had this huge existence, namely on the news talk end, KCBS, KGO, on the all news end, KCBS, when they were a real radio station and they actually did news. And of course, top 40, bubblegum was KFRC. I had a ritual myself. Saturday morning, cartoons, breakfast, all that stuff. I loved watching Bandstand, American Bandstand, at 11 o'clock on Channel 7, ABC station. And then at noon, I loved watching the black equivalent of Bandstand in those, I say those days, it wasn't that long ago. And it wasn't planned this way, but you had Soul Train on Channel 2, hosted by this guy. Remember this? My name is Don Cornelius, and my next guest who will be singing Lady Love, please welcome the one and only Lou Rawls. That's how Don Cornelius talked. And you saw the black songs, R&B and soul on Soul Train. It was such a cool show. But while every other kid was watching cartoons and the Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, I was watching Bandstand and Soul Train. But all those mechanisms on the broadcast end, nothing matched KFRC. I loved it. I miss it. KFRC, talk about the old adage, don't screw it up. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't mess up a good thing. And of course, in the middle 80s, they went to some stupid game show format, believe it or not. And then they went to some other stupid format. And of course, a very good thing got screwed up. And oh, by the way, Cumulus was not around then. So you can't blame Cumulus for that. Anyway, look, I love talking about stations that meant something, be it television. We talked about Channel 7 the other week. KGO, of course, I've talked about numerous times here. And of course, you can't leave out San Francisco Bay Area radio when it mattered, when there was soul and passion and frivolity was part of the format. And it was all so utterly cool. Cool. KFRC, the big 610. Dr. Don, I miss you. Rest in peace, the late, great Dr. Don, and all the great disc jockeys. Folks, oh, by the way, if you can, make a donation, subscribe to my channel here, become a paid subscriber to my 415 Media in the Bay Area Media Zone. $15 for the year. That's $1 a month. $1 a month plus $3, so that I can continue to give you scoops and stories and reflections and retro. And yes, the inside dope, the inside information, one of the many, many reasons why you come here and watch me. I will never dull you. I will always entertain you. So please go to the PayPal icon on the right side of my page. Click on it. I take every credit card. If you want to do cash, that's fine. No donation is too small, and no donation is too big. Thank you for becoming a subscriber. Thank all of you who watch and listen, who like this site. And even those of you that don't like it, thanks for coming here. Your presence is always, well, few people, not that welcome, but most of you are welcome. Thanks for watching. Please make a donation, and we'll see you soon.